My name is Catherine Evans. I'm 58 years old, a widow, and I live in a quiet, tree-lined suburb just outside of Portland. I've worked as the head archivist for a small historical society for the last 20 years. I raised 2 children, Isabella, my daughter, who just turned 33, and Daniel, my 30-year-old son. And I spent the better part of my adult life ensuring their world was secure, stable, and filled with the opportunities I never had. Last Thursday, I received a text message that shattered my reality. It was from Isabella. No preamble, just her name flashing on my screen. I felt a little flutter of warmth, thinking it was a last-minute detail about her upcoming wedding, a question about the menu, or a photo of the final dress fitting. We had just spoken a few days prior, finalizing my transfer of $35,000 to secure the exclusive wedding villa in Tuscany. She had her heart set on, but when I opened the message, the warmth drained from my body, leaving me cold and hollow. Mom, we need to talk about the wedding. Alessandro's family has been incredibly generous, and they've taken over most of the planning. They feel very strongly about keeping the guest list extremely intimate, just immediate family. After a lot of discussion, we all agree it would be best if you experienced the ceremony from home. We'll have a professional live stream set up. You'll have the best seat in the house. Honestly, it'll be like you're right here with us. I stared at the little glowing screen until the words blurred into meaningless shapes. The cup of tea I'd been cradling grew cold in my hands. I didn't shake. I didn't sob. Something deep within me simply recalibrated. A fault line I never knew existed had slipped, and the landscape of my life was permanently altered. I was still standing, but the ground beneath my feet was new and terrifyingly unfamiliar. I typed a reply with numb fingers, just 5 words. Of course, enjoy your day. I felt no anger, no desire to plead my case. I just felt a profound, settling silence, and I knew, with a certainty that was both frightening and peaceful, that those 5 quiet words would carry more weight than 1,000 shouted arguments. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want to cry. I wanted the quiet to be my answer. I set the phone down, finished my cold tea, and got ready for work as if it were any other Thursday. But it wasn't. That was the day I stopped pretending that a lifetime of devotion meant anything to my daughter. That was the day the scales fell from my eyes. If my story touches a place in your heart, if you know what it feels like to have your love taken for granted, then subscribe to this channel. Stay with me. There are more stories like mine to tell, and you're not alone in hearing them. The drive to the Historical Society was serene, the kind of overcast Portland morning that feels like a soft blanket, but I was insulated from it, wrapped in a bubble of disbelief. My mind kept circling back to a single, persistent thought. How did we get here? I've spent 20 years at the William J. Crocker Historical Society. It's a quiet job, full of dust and delicate paper and the faint, sweet smell of decaying ink. It's not a glamorous life, but it's a steady one, and steadiness was the only thing I could offer after my husband, David, died of a sudden aneurysm when Isabella was 16 and Daniel was 13. I remember the crushing weight of those first months, the sheer logistical terror of it all. I was standing in our kitchen, a stack of final medical bills and a mortgage notice on the counter, trying to figure out how to pay for Daniel's new braces and Isabella's upcoming school trip to DC. I didn't hesitate. I gave up my book club. I started taking on freelance archival restoration projects late into the night. I sold the jewelry my mother had left me, all of it. I told myself, over and over, that there would be time for me later. There never was. Every extra dollar I scraped together went to Isabella and Daniel. When Isabella decided to switch from pre-law to art history in her sophomore year, extending her college by a year, I took out a second line of credit on the house to cover the additional tuition. When she moved to San Francisco for an unpaid internship at a gallery, I covered her rent and groceries for 6 months. When she called me, heartbroken, after a messy breakup at 28, I booked the next flight out, held her while she cried, and cooked her a week's worth of meals in a sterile apartment that had never felt like a home. When Daniel and his wife, Sarah, were buying their first home, I gifted them the $15,000 they needed for the down payment without a second thought. I never kept a tally. That's what you do as a mother. You are the silent, steady engine of their lives. You don't expect applause. You just expect to be in the room. But that text message made me feel like a utility that had been disconnected, a service that was no longer required. My shelf life had expired. At the office, my boss, Franklin, a kind, rumpled man in his late 60s, who always remembers to ask about my rose bushes, stopped by my desk. He took one look at me and his smile faded. "Catherine," he said, his voice gentle, "you look like you've just seen something from one of our ghost tours." He set a fresh chamomile tea from the cafe down the street on my desk. It was a small, thoughtful gesture, and it nearly broke me. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to say, "My daughter just told me I'm not immediate family enough for her wedding," but the words felt too absurd, too painful to speak aloud. So, I just smiled a thin, tight smile, and said I'd had a rough morning. He nodded, understanding, and didn't press. That small kindness, the tea, the quiet concern, was an anchor in the roaring silence of my shock. It reminded me that I was still a person, seen and valued, outside of the role I played for my children. Around 11. My phone buzzed again. Isabella. Her name lit up the screen. An accusation. A series of text bubbles popped up. "Mom, please answer. This isn't funny. We need to talk about this." I didn't answer. I didn't read them. I sat at my desk, surrounded by the quiet history of other people's lives, and sipped my tea. And I thought, maybe it's time to stop being the one who is always on call. Maybe it's time to exit the stage of a play where I'm not even welcome in the audience. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change the course of everything. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to do something far more definitive. I was going to act out after work. I didn't go home. I drove to Northwest Trust Bank, a stately brick building downtown where I'd been a client for 30 years. Miriam, my financial advisor, a sharp, compassionate woman with a sleek gray bob, had helped me navigate David's life insurance, set up the kids' college funds, and plan for a retirement I never quite believed would come. "Catherine," she smiled, greeting me in the hushed, carpeted lobby. "Good to see you. What can I help you with today?" I followed her into her pristine office and sat in the familiar leather chair. My voice was eerily calm. "I need to stop a wire transfer, Miriam. The one to the Villa Rosetta in Tuscany." She blinked, her fingers already flying across her keyboard. "The wedding payment. Is everything all right?" "The circumstances have changed," I said, my tone leaving no room for further inquiry. She peered at her screen, clicking a few times. "Okay. It's scheduled but not yet processed. We can cancel it without a penalty if we act now." She looked up at me, her professional demeanor softening with concern. "Catherine, this is for $85,000. Are you absolutely sure?" I met her gaze steadily. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. $85,000. That was the final, staggering payment, on top of the $35,000 I'd already sent. $120,000 total, for a wedding in a country I was now explicitly not welcome to visit. I signed the digital cancellation forms with a hand that did not tremble. I walked out of the bank into the cool afternoon air, and I felt nothing. A great, hollowed-out silence. By the time I got home, there were 14 missed calls from Isabella, and 3 from Daniel. His voicemail was short and tense. "Mom, call me back. Izzy's losing her mind. What's going on?" I powered my phone off completely, in the quiet of my kitchen. I reached for the bottle of Barolo I'd been saving for a special occasion. I'd bought it for my last birthday, but Isabella had canceled our dinner at the last minute. "A work emergency," she'd said. I uncorked it, poured a generous glass, and took it out to my back patio. The spring evening was settling in, the air fragrant with blooming jasmine. A squirrel chattered on the fence. The world was continuing on, beautifully. INDIFFERENTLY. And then the memories, unbidden and relentless, washed over me. All the school plays I'd attended alone, saving a seat for a ghost. All the Christmases where I'd set 2 extra places, just in case, and ended up eating leftovers for a week. All the silent sacrifices. The worn-out winter coat I'd patched up for 3 seasons. The dream of a trip to Paris I'd deferred year after year. The quiet loneliness of a house that was too big for one person. I thought about Alessandro's mother, a woman I'd met only twice, whose name was Giovanna, a woman who knew nothing of Isabella's childhood fears. Her love for strawberry Pop-Tarts, the way she used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Yet her opinion, her definition of intimate, held more power than my 3 decades of motherhood. I thought of the winking emoji in Isabella's text, as if my being relegated to a pixelated spectator was a cheerful, casual update. And finally, I thought about myself, not as Isabella's mother, or Daniel's, or David's widow. But as Catherine, what did I want? I wanted a life that was mine. I wanted to matter to myself as much as I had mattered to them. I wanted to stop being an option and start being a person. That night, a little after 9, the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. I considered ignoring it, but a part of me knew who it was. I opened the door to find Daniel, still in his tech company khakis and polo, his face a mask of frustration. "Mom," he said, stepping past me into the entryway without an invitation. "What the hell is going on? Why is your phone off? Isabella is having a full-blown meltdown." I closed the door slowly. "It's nice to see you too, Daniel." He let out an exasperated sigh, running a hand through his hair. "She says you're not coming to the wedding now, that you're pulling some kind of power play." I actually laughed, a dry, hollow sound, a power play, for being uninvited from my only daughter's wedding. "Come on, Mom, don't be dramatic," he said, pacing my small living room. "Alessandro's family is paying for most of this. They have certain expectations. You know how these old-world Italian families are." I raised an eyebrow. "Old world? I've already paid $35,000. I was about to wire another 80. That isn't old world, Daniel. That's being used." He stopped dead in his tracks. 85. I thought it was 35 total. "It was," I said calmly, taking a sip of the wine I'd carried with me from the kitchen. "It isn't anymore." His face lost all its color. "Mom, they've already committed that money. The villa, the caterer, they're counting on it." "That is no longer my concern," I said, my voice even. "How can you say that?" His voice rose, tinged with panic. "Of course it's your concern. She's your daughter. I am aware," I replied quietly. "I am her mother, who was told to stay home and watch the event on a computer screen like a stranger." He threw his hands up in the air. "You always do this. You always make everything about you. Can't you just be happy for her?" And there it was, the final, devastating rewrite of our history. My lifetime of self-effacement, of putting them first, was now being framed as selfishness. And in that moment, the last fragile thread of my old identity snapped. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice low, but absolutely clear. "What? You heard me, Daniel. Get out, Mom." "No." The word was final. "I have given every part of myself, and I am done being cast as the villain in a story I built with love." He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, as if he was seeing me for the very first time. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The soft click of the front latch was a more profound sound than any door slam could ever be. I stood alone in the center of the room, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I made another startling discovery. The crushing weight of guilt I had expected was absent. In its place was a vast, terrifying, and exhilarating sense of freedom. The next morning, I woke up to a digital onslaught. My phone, once I turned it on, buzzed and vibrated for a full minute as 57 missed calls and a torrent of messages downloaded. They began with wounded confusion. "Mom, we need to talk. This is insane. Why are you being so childish?" Then, the tone shifted to panic. "The villa manager just called. The payment didn't go through. They're releasing our date in 48 hours. Alessandro's parents are livid. They said this just proves you're unstable." At 4:17 a.m. she had written, "I will never forgive you for this. You are ruining my life." I smiled into my morning coffee. Of course, she saw it that way. Isabella had grown up in the warm, constant glow of my sacrifices, so woven into the fabric of her existence that she never stopped to question their source. The comfort, the safety net, the endless font of support. It was all just part of her landscape, like sunshine or air. She assumed it was eternal. She assumed I was eternal in my role as her provider. But not this time. Later that morning, as I was carefully cataloging a collection of Civil War-era letters, an email notification popped up on my secondary monitor. The subject line was a single, desperate word: "Please." I opened it. "Mom, I know you're upset about the live stream, but this is too far. We have lost the villa. The caterer, who is the best in the region, will walk if we don't pay a 50% deposit by 5 p.m. tomorrow, their time." Alessandro's parents are beyond furious. They're saying this just proves you can't be trusted to be reasonable. "Please, don't do this to me. We can discuss you coming to the ceremony, but we need the money first." This is a disaster. There it was, the naked transaction. My physical presence at my own daughter's wedding was now a bargaining chip, contingent upon the restoration of my financial support. There was no apology, no recognition of the profound hurt, just a desperate negotiation. as if my love and my money were one and the same, a currency to be withheld or dispensed. I felt a strange, serene finality. I didn't reply. I simply closed the email and went back to the delicate, careful work of preserving history, a task that suddenly felt far more honest and rewarding than the one I had performed for most of my adult life. Around lunchtime, Franklin appeared at the doorway of my archive. "I'm heading to that new Thai place on Elm," he said. "I hate eating alone. Would you care to join me?" I almost said no. I was a creature of habit, and my habit was to eat a yogurt at my desk while reading. But the clarity of the past day had shifted something fundamental within me. Maybe I just needed to sit in a sunny restaurant with a kind person who asked for nothing more than my company. "I'd like that very much," I said, over plates of fragrant pad thai and green curry. He told me about his daughter, a marine biologist in Alaska, and how he missed her, but was so proud of the life she'd built. His eyes were warm and crinkled at the corners. He was real. He paused, sipping his water, and looked at me thoughtfully. "Forgive me for saying so, Catherine, but you seem different today, lighter, somehow." And to my own surprise, I told him about the text, the uninvitation, the money, the cancelled wire transfer, the confrontation with Daniel. I laid the whole, sordid, painful story out on the table between the spring rolls and the satay. When I finished, he didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell me it would all work out. He simply nodded, his expression grave and understanding. "There's a special kind of heartbreak," he said softly, "that comes from the people you've loved the most. Setting a boundary isn't an act of punishment. It's an act of self. And from where I'm sitting, it looks long overdue." He reached across the table and gave my hand a brief, firm squeeze. "I think you're being very brave." And for the first time since I'd read that text, I felt not just sure of my decision, but proud of it. When I returned to my desk, there were more missed calls, more frantic texts, but I felt an incredible detachment from them. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. My silence, my absence, my cancelled payment, they were my statement. For the first time, my actions were speaking for me, and they were saying volumes. That evening, as I pulled my sedan into the driveway, the motion-sensitive porch light flicked on, bathing the front steps in a warm, golden glow. Everything was peaceful, orderly, just as I'd left it. But then, a figure unfolded itself from the wicker chair on the porch, and I recognized her as I stepped out of the car. Lena. She had been Isabella's closest friend since middle school. She'd practically lived at our house during the summers, a constant presence by the pool, her laughter echoing through the halls. I hadn't seen her in at least 5 years. "Mrs. Evans," she said, her voice soft with apology. "I'm so sorry to just show up like this." "It's all right, Lena," I said, unlocking the front door. "Would you like to come in? I can make some coffee." She followed me inside, her eyes darting around the living room, taking in the familiar photographs, the same furniture, as if she were an archaeologist visiting a site from her youth. I busied myself with the coffee grinder, the familiar ritual a comfort. "Isabella sent you?" I finally asked, not turning around. She was quiet for a long moment. "Not exactly. She's not in a good place, Mrs. Evans. They lost the villa in Tuscany, the one she'd been dreaming of since she was a teenager. The caterer backed out. Alessandro's family is, well, they're not being very nice. They're talking about calling off the whole wedding." I said nothing, placing 2 steaming mugs on the coffee table. "She's terrified," Lena continued, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. "She knows she made a huge mistake. She doesn't know how to fix it." "Is that why you're here, Lena?" I asked gently. "To help her fix it." She shook her head, her gaze earnest. "No, I'm here to ask you, is there anything she could possibly say or do that would make this right?" I paused and truly considered the question. Would a coerced apology, born of financial desperation, heal the wound of being so casually excluded? Would it change the fact that my presence was deemed less important than my pocketbook? I looked at Lena's young, hopeful face, a face that still believed in the power of a simple "I'm sorry" to mend broken things. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "There isn't." Her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Not even if she comes here and apologizes on her knees." "Words are easy, Lena," I said, "especially when you're backed into a corner. But the people who truly value you, they don't wait until you've withdrawn your funding to see your worth." Lena looked down into her coffee, and I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She wasn't just here for Isabella, she was here learning a lesson for herself. "I get it," she whispered. "Even if she doesn't, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Evans, for all of it. You have nothing to be sorry for, dear, I replied. We sat in a comfortable, sad silence for a few minutes. Two women connected by a shared history and one painful, universal truth that love, even a mother's love, has its limits, and that sometimes the only way to teach someone your value is to demonstrate that you know it yourself. Lena didn't stay long. She didn't try to argue or convince me. She simply thanked me for the coffee, gave me a warm, lingering hug that felt like a blessing from the past, and walked out into the night. And as I closed the door, I felt the final, quiet closure on the woman. I used to be the woman who believed that endless giving was the same as being loved. The wedding, as Isabella had envisioned it, never happened. From what I gleaned through a tersely worded email from Daniel weeks later, they scrambled to arrange a small, rushed ceremony at a public garden in a nearby city. It was a fraction of the size, a shadow of the Tuscan dream. I was not invited, and the lack of an invitation this time felt like an affirmation, not a rejection. In the following months, Isabella sent one final, long email. It was a masterpiece of conflicted emotion, half heartfelt apology, half wounded justification, filled with phrases like, I didn't realize, and you have to understand the pressure I was under. I read it once, carefully. Then, I moved it to an archive folder and closed the lid on my laptop. I wasn't angry. The anger had burned away, leaving behind a cool, clear residue of acceptance. I was simply done. There is a profound peace that arrives when you finally release a weight you never realized you were carrying. It doesn't always come with fireworks of rage. Sometimes it arrives in a great, settling silence. For the first time in 33 years, I woke up and my first thought was not of what my children needed from me. I didn't brace for the day's potential demands or disguised guilt trips. I simply woke up. I made a new, simple rule for my life. My effort will always match my inclusion. My presence will never again be negotiable while my purse strings are expected to be wide open. I go to work and lose myself in the quiet stories of the past. I started visiting the art museum on my lunch breaks, just sitting with one painting for 20 minutes, truly seeing it. I signed up for a beginner's Italian class, not for anyone's wedding, but for myself. I have dinners with friends, real friends, who ask about my thoughts, my dreams, the book I'm reading, and who see me, not just the mother of their children's friends. And I've learned a lesson I wish with all my heart I'd learned decades ago. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Your own light is worth protecting. My story doesn't end with a dramatic reunion or a tearful forgiveness. It ends with me, in my garden, my hands in the soil, feeling the sun on my back, and knowing, truly knowing, that I am enough. I built a life of quiet dignity from the ashes of taken-for-granted devotion, and that is a victory no one can ever take from me. If you've ever had to choose between being loved and respecting yourself, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. You are not alone on this path, and if this journey of finding strength in silence resonates with you, subscribe to the channel. Stay with me for the next story. There is always another side to hear.